Founders of this country felt about the influence of Christian quotes and Christianity as a basis. They're saying it laid the basis for the laws of our country. 34% of their quotes were directly from the Bible, the direct quotes that they could find of all the founders of this country.
Yeah, I think he mentioned out of the 3,154 direct quotes from the founding fathers of that University of Houston study, 34% of them came out of the Bible. And then he, if you remember, he contrasted, Mike, the American Revolution at the time of France and all those European countries during their revolutions, and because ours was based on a foundation of Jesus, we still have that same government in place. But yet France has gone through 7 government changes. I think he said Italy, 51 government changes. Now, is this a coincidence, or is this a pure fact, history fact, that when you, whatever is built on the absolute truth will never crumble?
I totally agree. And you know, Jesus said he is the way, the truth, and the life. And if God's word in the Bible, as Jesus quotes all the time, quotes only from the Bible, calls all the prophets prophets, if you base your laws on God's laws, if he's the truth, which I believe he certainly is, things are going to work out better. When you deviate from the instruction book, things are not going to work out that well. And we're going to see more on Thomas Jefferson's letter in which that quote of separation of church and state came from, and the intent of that, in a couple of minutes. And it's totally the opposite of what you hear today. And you know, we talked about this a little bit before, and you were referring to it at the beginning of the program, Jay. I mean, people know that. They know that there were 87 precedents cited by the Supreme Court in talking about Christianity being an integral base and the foundation of the laws in this country. Now, later on, when people change that, you're going to see they don't even quote any precedents in the Supreme Court, none. And with the 87, they go on and say, if you remember, they could have quoted many more, but that should make the case.
That should be sufficient enough.
Right.
What's interesting is if you stick around, you're going to see that shift I was referring to earlier, and why the Supreme Court is where it's at today versus where it was at in the very beginning under John Jay, that first Chief Justice, you know, who oversaw the Constitution, you know. And you know, that First Amendment, Mike, the quote that came up there was, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof." So, did they want separation of church and state?
Well, obviously, they were quoting, they made statements directly to the fact, George Washington, Adams, saying Christianity was necessary for the preservation of morals and right action, and it was necessary. They weren't separating anything. They were saying, this is necessary, we need to talk about it in public life. No problem with it. You know, let's just run the second section, because we'll go more directly right to that quote on separation of church and state, where it came from, and how the original courts viewed it, and how courts now view it. So if you guys can get that section ready to roll, we'll do that.
And keep in mind, this is the American heritage. This is your heritage. This is my heritage. This is our heritage. This is where we came from, and this is what this United States of America is all about.
Yeah, if we want to change it, you know, it's a democracy. We can change the Constitution anytime we want. But to go on the other hand and say it's unconstitutional to mention anything about God in textbooks, unconstitutional? Unconstitutional means the Founding Fathers didn't want it involved in the Constitution. We're seeing that's exactly the opposite. So is there an agenda happening here? Why don't we run that film, guys, and we'll talk to you guys afterwards.
Recorded in the U.S. Congressional records from June the 7th through September the 25th of 1789 make clear their intent for the First Amendment. By it, the founders were saying, we do not want in America what we had in Great Britain. We don't want one denomination running the nation. We will not allow all to be Catholics or Anglicans or any other single denomination. We do want God's principles, but we don't want one denomination running the nation. This intent was well understood, as evidenced by court rulings after the First Amendment. For example, a 1799 court declared, by our form of government, the Christian religion is the established religion, and all sects and denominations of Christians are placed on the same equal footing. Again, note the emphasis. We do want Christian principles, we do want God's principles, but we don't want one denomination to run the nation. Thomas Jefferson, to whom the now popular phrase separation of church and state is attributed, also believed, as did the other founders, that the First Amendment simply prevented the federal establishment of a single denomination, a fact he made clear in a letter to Benjamin Rush. In that letter, Jefferson committed himself as president to not allowing the Episcopalians, the Congregationalists, or any other denomination to achieve what Jefferson called the establishment of a particular form of Christianity. So what is the source of Jefferson's now infamous phrase? On November the 7th, 1801, the Baptists of Danbury, Connecticut wrote Jefferson concerned that the guarantee of the free exercise of religion appeared in the First Amendment. To them, this suggested that the right to religious exercise was a government-granted rather than a God-granted right, thus implying that someday the government might try to regulate religious expression. They believed that freedom of religion was a God-granted, unalienable right, and that the government should be powerless to restrict religious activities unless, as the Baptists explained, those activities cause someone to, quote, work ill to his neighbor. Jefferson understood their concern. In his response on January the 1st, 1802, he assured them that the free exercise of religion was indeed an unalienable right and would not be meddled with by the government. Jefferson pointed out to them that there was a wall of separation between church and state to ensure that the government would never interfere with religious activities. Today, all that is heard of Jefferson's letter is the phrase, a wall of separation between church and state, without either the context or the explanation given in the letter or its application by earlier courts. The clear understanding of the First Amendment for a century and a half was that it prohibited the establishment of a single denomination. National policies and rulings in that century and a half always reflected that interpretation. For example, in 1853, a group petitioned Congress to separate Christian principles from government. They desired a so-called separation of church and state, with chaplains being turned out of Congress, out of the military, etc. Their petition was referred to the House and the Senate Judiciary Committees, which investigated for almost a year to see if it would be possible to separate Christian principles from government. Both the House and the Senate Judiciary Committees returned with the reports. The following are excerpts from the House report delivered on March the 27th, 1854. The Senate report was very similar. The House report said, had the people, the Founding Fathers, during the Revolution had any suspicion of any attempt to war against Christianity, that revolution would have been strangled in its cradle. At the time of the adoption of the Constitution and its amendments, the universal sentiment was that Christianity should be encouraged, but not any one sect, denomination. The report continued. It said, in this age, there is no substitute for Christianity. That was the religion of the founders of the Republic, and they expected it to remain the religion of their descendants. 2 months later, the Judiciary Committee made this strong declaration. It said, the great, vital, and conservative element in our system, the thing that holds our system together, is the belief of our people in the pure doctrines and the divine truths of the gospel of Jesus Christ. The committees explained that they would not separate these principles, for it was these principles and activities which had made us so successful. They'd been our foundation, our basis. During the 1870s, 1880s, and 1890s, yet another group which challenged specific Christian principles in government arrived before the Supreme Court. Now, Jefferson's letter had remained unused for years, for as time had progressed after its use in 1802, and after no national denomination had been established, his letter had fallen into obscurity. But now, 75 years later, in the case Reynolds versus the United States, the plaintiffs resurrected Jefferson's letter, hoping to use it as an issue to their advantage. At that time, the court printed a lengthy segment of Jefferson's letter and then used that letter on separation of church and state to again prove that it was permissible to maintain Christian values, principles, and practices in official policy. For the next 15 years during that legal controversy, the Supreme Court utilized Jefferson's letter to ensure that Christian principles remained a part of government. Following this controversy, Jefferson's letter again fell into disuse. It remained silent for the next 70 years until 1947, when in the case Everson versus Board of Education, the court, for the first time, did not cite Jefferson's entire letter, but selected only 8 words from it. The court now announced, the First Amendment has erected a wall of separation between church and state. That wall must be kept high and impregnable.